Good morning. Welcome to a tertiary world. Today I'm reading you the last memory that arose as I walked down Pigdon Street in 2008, part of a project that saw me walking down 14 streets, 7 north-south and 7 east-west, in order to retrieve the first 7 memories that arose as I walked down each street, all of them constituting a memory body that I had built over many decades inside that grid of 14 streets. This particular story is the last memory that arose as I walked down Pigdon Street. Pigdon is the 4th east-west street. Its colour is green. This colour is violet. Corner Pigdon and Best Streets. Piedemonte's supermarket has stood on this corner for over 40 years. An officious, business-like man in his 60s, Mr. Piedemonte Senior himself constantly stalks the aisles, checking the availability of particular products and making sure they're stacked neatly. He's always been very serious and intensely preoccupied with getting everything right. Through the 40 years I've shopped here, I've never seen him smile once. Occasionally over the years I've tried to change my shopping habits and go elsewhere where the prices have not risen as much. Piedemonte's is supposedly the 3rd most expensive supermarket in Melbourne. But I always come back here even though I know how expensive it is, obstinately waiting for a parking spot out the front and dashing in to wait where someone's reversing lights have come on. The tiny man who heads the liquor department has been here just as long as Mr. Piedemonte, and he's just as serious. A few weeks ago I returned to my car with a box full of groceries, only to realise that I must have left the car unlocked because my briefcase had disappeared from the front passenger seat. There was nothing of great significance in it except for my address book. 20 years of accumulated phone numbers and addresses had suddenly vanished. Most of them were now no longer useful, though they constituted the important link to the ongoing illusion that a fixed self somehow still exists. Some had been scribbled hurriedly in between the ones I had neatly transcribed when I bought this particular address book some years ago, whilst others had been written slowly and deliberately. I spent some time walking through all the back lanes around the supermarket, hoping my bag was sticking out of a rubbish bin or had been thrown in a dark corner. I peered over many fences, but to no avail. I went back to the car and sat in it for a while, watching people walk in and out of the store. I kept looking at the empty space on the passenger seat. Had I really ever owned a black vinyl briefcase? I turned round and reached into the cardboard box overflowing with groceries I had placed on the back seat. I picked a mushroom out of a brown paper bag and ate it. Then I opened a round plastic container full of mixed olives and ate a few juicy green ones. My breathing gradually slowed and I tried to objectively consider the loss. Perhaps it's time, I thought, to start again. Perhaps it's time to lose all those addresses, all those numbers. I wondered about the thief and what he or she was doing right now, whether they were looking through the address book right this moment, wondering who all those people were, what they did, what they looked like. Or perhaps they were even planning a robbery at one of those addresses. I didn't want to think about that. Then Mr. Piedemonte came out through the sliding doors right in front of me, holding a tiny girl in his arms. She must have been his granddaughter. They were both laughing and yelling, and he suddenly pulled something out of his pocket and she hugged him, squealing excitedly. At that moment, the liquor department boss suddenly scampered out of the far door, yelling at Mr. Piedimonte. He was holding a wallet in his hand and waving it around above his head as he walked as quickly as he could towards his boss. He pushed his arms out and reached over, handing him the wallet with both hands. I could see Mr. Piedimonte's chest and shoulders heaving with laughter. He put his granddaughter down and tucked the wallet inside the coat pocket. Then he bent down and said something to the little girl. She waved at the liquor store boss, who by now was headed back into the supermarket. Grandfather and granddaughter turned and hand in hand made their way to a car parked nearby. The little girl skipped the last few meters. The liquor store boss stood at the entrance and watched them till they drove away. Then he walked back into the store, shaking his head. I could see him now through the glass windows, gesticulating and smiling broadly at a few of the checkout girls. So, both Mr. Piedimonte and his friend could laugh. And how? I took another mushroom out of the paper bag and another green olive out of the plastic container. Then I pushed the olive into the mushroom's soft center, deep in the base of its stalk. I put the whole thing in my mouth, determined to chew it slowly and to taste each tiny bud of flavor. The southwestern corner of Richardson and Canning Street. This was simply where my favourite house through the 60s was located. Bare bricked, its garden beds were filled with stumpy rose bushes, crimson red buds proliferating enormously twice a year. The owners were never seen or ever known, and the front door was always closed. It seemed inexplicably and perennially empty. Occasionally at night a faint light would appear in the top room, but I'm not sure if it was imagined or real. That's all. But then in the spring of 1969, something strange happened. Almost overnight, the house became a kindergarten, with children and doting mothers populating its every nook and cranny. I missed its vast emptiness, the large gaps in its narrative, the mystery of that faint light that occasionally appeared and was then remembered as if in a dream. I soon realised that every neighbourhood, perhaps every street, needs an empty house to function as the repository for all the neighbourhood's dreams. The vaster its emptiness, the more space there is for the collected dreams to be kept safe. The more space there is for them to be both safely at rest and then occasionally dare to come to life. But after the transformation of this house into a kindergarten, we, the inhabitants of its neighbouring streets, were left without such a possibility. Slowly the frequency of local car thefts began to rise. One now heard of occasional house break-ins and even car accidents, never known until this moment, proliferating in the streets around us. Without a large empty house with an uncertain history to absorb our unconscious distresses, as well as the occasional subconscious projection of an as yet unconsummated violence, all our unresolved dreams began to cast a hazy pall over the neighbourhood. Beyond an increasingly problematic dream life, daily life itself within the pall gradually became much more complicated, less certain, even anxiety-ridden. Until tomorrow.